Hi, everyone. So my name is Aurken Sierra. I come from the University of Navarra in Spain, and I'm here to present an exploratory analysis, an ongoing investigation that I've been doing that stems from the REMIT project, the Resilient Media for Democracy in the Digital Age, together with two colleagues of my school, Mercedes Medina, who is in the public there, and Jordi Rodriguez, who could not attend, but sends his regards. So mainly what we've been doing with this investigation is to analyze whether this information concern is influenced or not, and whether that influence is statistically significant or not by political ideology, okay, in Spain, using different types of data and some debates that have been happening in Spain and that are connected to something that you said earlier. So I'm going to start with a massive context really fast to end up talking about Spain. I think that there is no need to talk about how relevant this information is and how, well, what a problem or a challenge it can be, right, in the current times. So earlier this year, the Davos Risk Report identified misinformation and disinformation as the most relevant problem by 2027 by a number of reasons, right? You know that they elaborate a number of reports, a number of they identify what are the most relevant challenges, and they talk about years and all that. They said by 2027, misinformation, disinformation was going to be a huge problem, right? So that's something that we all know. When we look at Europe and we compare the situation of Spain with other countries, we see that, well, disinformation is a problem in most European countries, if not to say in all of them. But we have some countries like Spain, Portugal, the UK, that are ranking particularly high, right? That doesn't mean that in other countries they're not worried about this information. It means that in Spain, well, we are extremely worried. I don't know why in the last years, right? So we wanted to see why that was, right? So for example, 91% of Spaniards think that this information is a threat for democracy, right? So again, this is not something that is unique to Spain, but there are a number of features that work against us, against the Spaniards in Spain, right? The first one has to do with the acute political polarization that we've been experiencing since 2015. We are in the highest levels of polarization, ideological polarization in Spain since the Second Republic. So we didn't even experience this type of polarization after our dictatorship fell, right, in 1975. So the levels of polarization are massive now. So that makes our market particularly vulnerable to disinformation, right? Because people are too kind of like invested in politics and they want to be right? So they have this confirmation bias, their media diet also gets influenced. And we know, because there is a number of publications and research done already, that ideology is connected to the trust you have in media, or that ideology can be connected to how much you trust certain publications, right? So that's kind of like the particular context of Spain. What has been the response, so to speak, that Spaniards and the Spanish institutions have had? Well, they've done some, right, to be honest. To begin with, we could talk about the European Democracy Action Plan in 2020, how that was implemented, was taken to Spain, right? So in that frame, or from that point of view, a number of fora were organized to talk about disinformation, about how disinformation affects political campaigns, how propaganda is spreading, how the far right has been getting more and more relevance since 2019, right? And last year in 2024, our government launched what they call the Spanish Democracy Action Plan, somehow like replicating the European Democracy Action Plan. The thing is that everything is framed from a political point of view, because when they launched this action plan was only launched after the PM's wife was indicted. So they took the PM's wife in front of a judge, and suddenly the prime minister is super worried about the Spanish democracy. But he was not worried when his vice president was taken in front of a judge, just to say that. Good. So with this context, we wanted to analyze whether ideology is affecting Spaniards and how they assess this information concern. And we used a mixed method approach. We get information mainly from survey data regarding the digital news report. We've been using a combination of waves, right? So we've been using the DNR 2024 wave to see and assess the situation currently in Spain. And then we've been using a combination of the waves between 2018 and 2024 to see how that has changed. Together with that, we also analyzed the parliamentary debate that took place in July 2024 when the current prime minister presented the Spanish Democracy Action Plan, right? He took that plan in front of parliament. They discussed that on the floor. So you have the prime minister and the most relevant political leaders in Spain talking about disinformation and about democracy, right? So we used a more qualitative approach. They're mainly based, we have to do a second wave, right? But we have so far used natural language processing with Python to analyze frames and content analysis. So all of our methodology revolves around four big research questions. Two of them are more descriptive. We wanted to know whether Spain is an outlier or not, or if it's substantially different from other countries, because we see that in some charts. We wanted to see if the data is confirming that. Then we checked whether political alignment has some kind of explanatory force or is able to explain that disinformation concerning Spanish citizens and which groups are more worried about it. And then we analyzed the parliamentary debate to see how those politicians and the members of parliament are talking about disinformation, to see which are the frames and the ideas that they convey. So moving on to results, the preliminary results that we have, right? When we look at Europe and concern about disinformation, there are two clear outliers. Again, that doesn't mean that the rest are not worried, because if you see in a scale from 1 to 5, most of them are in between 4 and 3, so they are worried. But the Spaniards and the Portuguese, we are particularly worried. But then when you check how politics is done in Portugal and how politics is done in Spain, you can tell the differences. We could discuss that later if you want. So we conducted a t-test to see if the means are different or not. We validated the results. The long story short is that, yes, Spanish citizens are significantly more concerned about this information in comparison to other Europeans, right? If we take Europeans, the rest of the European countries as a whole. The same thing happens with media trust, but on the contrary, instead of having higher trust, we have lower trust than other citizens in Europe, right? So usually the Spaniard doesn't trust the media so much as they do in other countries. Good. Regarding research question 2, right? So how has the disinformation concern changed in the last 7 years? We see a clear activation after 2022. In 2022, we started a massive electoral year that lasted until mid-2024. So it lasted nearly 2 years, right? With regional, local, national, European elections happening between 2022 and 2024. So everybody was extremely worried about politics, and politics being such a relevant issue. Well, it translated into this change, right, in disinformation concern. We checked whether this was affecting, or how this was affecting the different ideological families in Spain. I personally find it interesting how, all of them, right, they get activating in 2022, right? In the next waves, they are more concerned than they were in the previous one. But I just find extremely funny how the very far left, the extreme left concern changes a lot, right? In 2018, we had a conservative government, the progressive government arrives, these changes, and then it gets activated in 2022 again when we have elections. So you can tell that they follow. It's not that they answer, but there is somewhat of following, right? What happens in the political reality. Regarding the political alignment, we came from here. This is from the DNR 2024. So I think that in this chart, it's pretty obvious that the two extremes behave differently regarding disinformation concern, right? The shapes are completely different in the sense that you have people who are worried about disinformation as they do in other, right, ideological families. But then when you look at those that say that they are not extremely worried and they're not concerned, you have more people in the extremes that are not worried about disinformation than you find in the center of the ideological spectrum, right? So if you find that, there's a difference. So we conducted an ANOVA and a TACI to see whether disinformation concern is connected to ideology, and we found that it is, but that it is more in the extremes, right? All the ideological families, right? All the members, all the surveys that we took data from, where you could see that ideology was influencing, right? They're concerned about disinformation, but that concern was a bit more heightened, if you want, right? It was more stressed, more relevant between the extreme left and the extreme right. which again replicates something that has appeared once and again when you talk about disinformation and polarization, what is that inverted U, right? You find usually more trust in the media in the center, less trust in the media in the extremes. You find more politically activated people in the extremes than you find in the center, right? So we see that that happens with the disinformation concern, and that it also happens, this is just for fun, we just wanted to see if that got replicated in the trust in media, and it actually happens, right? People from the extreme left and extreme right, they tend to trust less the media in general and the media they consume, right? The media that they are using. We could talk about that because I don't think I will have the time, but if you want to know more about that, happy to talk about it. Good. So moving on to the last research question on the parliamentary debate analysis. As I say, we used a number of, well, we did a number of tests using mainly a huge library that if anyone is interested, I could share, that has natural language processing. It's been trained to be able to grasp what people want to say when they speak in politics. Okay, so it's particularly trained to detect the different, well, details, nuances that people use in political debate. So we conducted a number of tests. The first one was, well, a corpus, and more or less like a broad point of view of what was happening in our debate. We see that it's a pretty complex debate, right? Because 18% of the words that they use are unique in the sense that there is a really rich vocabulary. I don't know how it is in other countries, but in Spain, in our sessions, in our parliamentary sessions, politicians read, they don't talk, right? So they have their debates, they arrive, they just read their debate and they go home. That can lead to some happy things happening, right? Like not answering the question that you're being asked or saying something completely different, but that just happens, right? So we conducted a content analysis, and we see that mostly when our politicians talk about disinformation, they have two things in mind. They're pretty media-centric, so they talk a lot about the media, so they think it's a problem of the media or affecting the media. And they're also talking a lot about intentions. They talk about intentions. It's not only that they say that they are promoting some sort of, hoaxes or fake news or whatever. They're actually framing media, right, as pseudo media. Those media they don't like, they frame them as pseudo media, saying that they have some obscure intentions behind them to damage the political opposition, right? Then we conducted a discursive frames analysis to see which were the frames that were activated when they were talking. That is, what are they talking about, right? They're talking about disinformation, but what are the points of view that they're taking when they talk about disinformation? And we saw that there are three massive frames. The democratic threat, so they understand this information when they talk about disinformation, they talk about it from a democratic threat point of view. They make constant references to technology and how that impacts the media. And finally, they also talk about the social impact, right? This was conducted using a cluster analysis. And finally, we analyzed, well, the sentiment analysis, which, again, no surprises here, massively polarized discourse, right? Extremely, extremely negative. I have just one example that I brought here because I knew it was going to be short in time. But this sentence was labeled as the most negative sentence in the whole debate, right? Ironically, many of those who speak of censorship today and ridicule these measures never condemned the infamous Francoist regime that muzzled the free press for 4 decades and pushed our country toward modernization. That's a translation for in Spanish, so sorry for the funny structure, but that's what our prime minister said to the leader of the opposition. So they're not friends, right? They don't want to reach agreements, at least not in public. So the conclusions so far, and I will finish with this, well, the next slide actually. They are preliminary conclusions because as I say, we're still working. But again, we see that there is some, together with the massive decline in traditional media we see with people consuming less and less traditional media in Spain, we also see that there are a number of people who are actually located in the ideological extremes that are going towards user-generated content, right? They're trying to be as far as possible off traditional media. They're getting information from social networks and similar stuff that they can control, right? And actually, you can see this really clearly when you compare, right, the media diets that people from different ideologies have. The second is that our parliamentary discourse is completely focused on the internationality of deception. When our politicians talk about disinformation, they're constantly talking about that, right? They frame media as disinformation. They talk about how they're trying to do harm to our society. Funny thing, they usually use Spanish terms, which is good, I guess. Right? They don't use kind of like this fake news or something like that. Third finding that we found is that there is this massive weaponization. That's me. That's a massive weaponization of disinformation. Disinformation and the label of disinformation is used as a political tool in the political debate in Spain, right? Our prime minister has been targeting certain kind of like newspapers or websites because they are criticizing him, but we can find the same thing happening in the far right, in the right, right? The opposition is doing exactly the same thing with the media I don't like, right? So they ban El País, they ban La Ser, as the others do with other media outlets, right? There are some radios, for example, they haven't had an interview with the prime minister, massive radios, they haven't had an interview with the prime minister since 2018. He only visits in campaign, right, when he's doing campaign. So we've been having this for a number of years now. And finally, yeah, we have like this inverted U of extremism that gets replicated against and again. So as I say, these are just preliminary conclusions. We hope to continue working. So if anyone has any ideas or wants to just give us some feedback, happy to learn from you, right? So thank you. That's my email in case if you want to send me something. And thank you. Yeah, I'll shut up.